The militants fighting for domination in Iraq belong to the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Levant. Let's take a closer look at the group, which is among the most radical jihadists in the region. It was established at the start of the war in Iraq and pledged allegiance to Osama bin Laden in 2004. At that time, the organization called itself Al-Qaeda in Iraq. It was later rebranded to the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, but by 2013, it had established a strong presence in conflict-torn Syria. Last week, the group seized control of a key city in the Iraqi province of Anbar, near Baghdad. The ultimate goal of these radicals is the creation of an Islamic state that would span several countries, including Syria and Iraq. Let's now discuss this further with geopolitical researcher Soraya Sepaphour-Ulrich. She joins us live. The U.S. is increasing military support for the Iraqi government. Iran has offered help as well. Does Iraq need the help from Tehran?
Well, certainly it needs the support of, but I doubt very much that Iran would send personnel there to fight the Al-Qaeda or the Islamist extremists. But it's very interesting that America has offered its help, because it seems America would like to help the Iraqi government fight the very terrorists that were created because of the occupation of the foreign forces of Americans. And yet, in Syria, next door in Syria, the same group are being aided to overthrow the legitimate government in Syria. So America is continuing its geopolitical games in the region. And of course, the people that suffer are the countries themselves. Iran is a neighbor to Iraq, so the spillover would deeply affect Iran. But America, well, is sitting nice and cozy across the ocean. And, I think perhaps Iran does have legitimate concern there.
You mentioned that the U.S. and Iran have been propping up different sides of the conflict in Syria. Are they really united over this struggle in neighboring Iraq, or does it go deeper?
I think they have totally different goals. In the same fighters that came over to Iraq in 2003 to get rid of the occupational forces, they actually became radicalized in Iraq. And they found themselves drawn into the fight in Syria as well. And I think if we want to talk about having different goals, we must understand that when this started, the whole fighting in 2005, the extremists, as they're now being called, were fighting occupation forces in Iraq. There was no divide between, let's say, Sunni and Shia at the time, until, if your viewers recall, in 2006, there was an explosion, a bomb in a Shiite holy city, a Shiite shrine, Askariya shrine, which is very holy to the Shiite faith. And that was the beginning of this division that we now generally refer to as the Sunni-Shiite divide. And it only got even more exasperated when the Americans executed Saddam Hussein on a date that was very holy to the Sunni, Eid al-Hayt, and in Iran or in Shiites they call it Fitr. It's basically the same thing, except the timeline kicks in a bit later for the Shiites. So it seemed to the Iraqi Sunnis as if the Americans were given the execution of Saddam Hussein as a gift to the Shiite. And this is how the divisions really took shape and started. And I don't think we should forget this fact. I don't think we should forget how the division came to be. But as far as extremism is concerned, I do believe that it is a goal for Iran to fight extremism. On the other hand, we know that the United States is still feeding the fighters in Syria through its ally Jordan. So it's very hard to accept what America has to say at face value when they still continue to support them.
I wanted to ask you exactly about that, about extremists in Syria, about them flourishing, fractioning out. Has Washington at all changed its policy towards Syria?
It's hard to know what they're thinking, but you can only look at what they've always done and have been doing. Again, going back in time a bit, if you look at the 1980-88 war between Iran and Iraq, Washington was feeding intelligence to both sides. And when they were asked what was the point of this, they said they were creating a bloodbath. And one official said you should have seen them go at each other. So the whole purpose was to get them to kill each other. And right now in Syria, Washington, and with help from other Western countries, is sending training and arms to the militants and the Islamists in Syria. How will they know who the end result, who the end user is? All they see is this continuation of chaos and killing, which is weakening the Syrian government. And to me, from the way I see it, that is the whole purpose. The whole purpose is to weaken the Syrian military and Assad.
Surely all of these al-Qaeda-linked groups in Syria and in the region, in fact, can't be gaining momentum on their own. Let's talk a little bit more about who could be their possible backers.
I'm sorry.
I want to talk a little bit more about who could be the possible backers for these factions that we're seeing breaking off from al-Qaeda, obviously still linked to the extremist organization. Who could be funding this?
Well, I have no doubt Saudi Arabia is funding them. But I also have no doubt that Saudi Arabia would not be funding them without a nod from the United States. When there was the headlines here in the U.S. Stated that Saudi Arabia has sent death row inmates to fight in Syria. A few months later, the United States sent Saudi Arabia cluster bombs as a reward. Yes, it was a sale, it recycles the petrodollars, but if America was really opposed to Saudi Arabia funding terrorists, America would not be selling it arms. Europe would not be selling it jet fighters, which is what it's doing. So they are complicit. It's just that Saudi Arabia, and I've always maintained that Saudi Arabia is the gladiator for the empire. It does their bidding, it funds their wars, and yes, it does benefit from them. But its time will come up soon. But for now, yes, Saudi Arabia is 100% behind the Al-Qaeda or Islamist extremists in Syria, and I have no doubt in Iraq.
Soraya Sepaphour-Ulrich, geopolitical researcher, live with us on the line from the U.S. Thanks so much for your analysis this hour.